This is Center Stage, putting your firm in the spotlight by highlighting business owners and other industry experts to help take your firm to the next level. Hey everyone, and welcome to Center Stage. I'm your host, John Henson, and today we are continuing on a theme that we've touched on a few times here lately, and that is about your authenticity and how it shines through your marketing message. It comes through in how you network. It comes through in just even, marketing aside, just in how you approach the legal work that you do. And so it's been a very important conversation and something that I really want to continue driving home, because I continue to hear lawyers out there talk about like, oh, I'm not really that special. I don't really do anything unique. I'm just doing this or doing that with clients. And that's really not the case. Like you do have a unique message. There is something there that helps you stand out, and that's something that you do that is very special. And so to add on to this conversation and to help share her insights, I am joined by the founder of Be Authentic Incorporated, Erin Hatzikostas. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for nailing my name. You rocked it.
Awesome. I got as soon as I got to it, I was like, oh man, I don't remember
People freak out.
I know how to say it right. Yeah.
People freak out. I see it every time.
Yeah. I had an internal moment there.
I get it. It's okay.
Well, all right. At least we got past it. So glad you're here. Before we jump in, tell us a little bit about yourself and why this area is so important to you.
Yeah. So just a little bit of my background, I started in the corporate workspace about 25 years ago. I was at Western Michigan University sophomore year, dropped out of engineering, didn't know what I wanted to do. And my roommate came home one day and she was so jacked up. She's like, oh my God, Erin, I found the career for you. I found it. And I'm like, okay, Amy, what is it? And she's like, no, it's high pay, low stress. And I was like, okay, I'm listening. She's like, it's called an actuary. And I was like, oh, and this is 1996. So I couldn't Google just like how quote unquote cool actuary was. So I pursued it, right? Because high pay, low stress. And ended up sort of coming out to the East Coast, working, getting a job with Aetna, swindled them in. And I spent about 3 years taking exams. I think I took 7 exams. I also spent 3 years failing 7 actuarial exams, which was, really fun as a high achiever to completely and utterly fail in your first career on an objective level. But I was lucky. I was at a big company. And so there were a lot of opportunities, and sort of bobbed and weaved my way, as we do, doing things that we're highly unqualified to do. And eventually, speaking of highly unqualified, I eventually was named the CEO of one of their subsidiary companies. Now, this is important. I am a small town girl. I had, teachers as parents. I had no aspirations. I was a hard worker. I was sharp. I did good at what I do, but I was not that person that was like, I'm gonna be an executive. I'm going to have the big job. And I took over the division. It sounded sexy, but most people were like, "Are you crazy?" Because the company was like just a disaster. It was an integration gone bad. It was an acquired company. It was the classic, like, let's bring in these entrepreneurs and then give them, no money to do what they need to do, and then yell at them when it doesn't go well, right? And so I took over at a tough time, and earnings had been flat for years. And when you have flat earnings, you can't reinvest in the business. And so that's frustrating, right? You can't innovate. You can't invest in your people. Everybody was feeling it. And I took over, and 3 years later, as CEO, we tripled earnings and employee engagement went up 15%. And, along the way, I didn't have imposter syndrome per se, but I was always sort of like, when am I going to be found out? When is either my luck going to run out, or I'm going to be found out? Because here's why. I would look around me and I'd look at my peers, and they weren't sacrificing as much as I was, right? They weren't grinding it out. They weren't, traveling every week. Or I wasn't traveling every week. Like they were. I wasn't moving my family. I wasn't, working every weekend. And so I kind of thought, okay, at some point, like, your success cannot continue, right?
Yeah.
And then it's kind of a whole nother track, which we won't get into, but I sort of got this itch and decided it was time to sort of jump out of corporate. I was just really scratching for something new. It felt stupid because things were going really well. But when I announced my retirement, people kept saying, we're going to miss your authentic leadership. like message after message, discussion after discussion. And I wasn't surprised they called me authentic. But I never, before that, it wasn't like this badge that had been pinned. And here's why I tell you this, as a frame for everything we're going to talk about. What I realized, and I won't say in that moment because it takes a little while, right? I put
Yeah.
together, I wasn't going to be found out. I was just playing a different game than everybody else, than every other executive. And I was not just being authentic, we can get into that, for myself, because authenticity isn't a permission, it's a power. It's not about you. It's actually about you working hard to buck the norm and expose things so that other people can trust you and connect with you, et cetera. But what I'd realized was that I was using that strategically, subconsciously. I had learned it from my father and did all that digging and wrote about that in my first book. But I realized that I was retaining the best talent because of my authenticity. I was creating great connections and trust with our customers because of it. I was negotiating deals better, not because I was strategic, but because I was using authenticity and they were thrown off by it. And then they were, connected by it. I was getting attention. And so I tell you all of that to say that I truly believe in this concept of authenticity, and not just as a lazy thing that you give yourself permission to do, but as something that can be strategic and has to be actually purposeful. Here's why: because in business, whether you're in the big corporation or like your listeners, running your own business, which I do now too.
Yeah.
The norm takes you down this river of not being authentic. It's just easy to get caught up in. So it takes work, it takes thought, it takes a little bit of guts to purposely be authentic. But if you do, I promise you the results will be amazing.
Yeah. I mean, and it kind of sounds like, at least from where I'm sitting, especially in the corporate world, there's almost like a game you have to play. There's these kind of standard expectations. You kind of are supposed to act a certain way, say certain things a certain way. And then someone like you comes along, and you're not doing that, not necessarily out of rebellion or because you don't like it, but you're just being yourself. And that throws so many people off that now it's called authentic, or maybe it's unique, or, whatever the case is. And so at least that's what I was hearing, from a lot of what you're saying. And so how do you define authenticity? Because I know that's a pretty, it's kind of a buzzword right now. I mean, I know, at least for me personally, we set our goals to start this year. Mine was to be more authentic, ironically. And, it's interesting. And I want to hear how you kind of define all of this, because at least for me, I'm seeing it more as just kind of leaning into the things that make you stand out and unique. But how do you see it?
Yeah. I mean, a couple of things. One, I always deprogram. It's not being yourself. It's not synonymous with being yourself, and it's not synonymous with transparency. They're two different things. The Greek root is authentikos, and authentikos means three things. It means to be genuine, which is makes sense, right? But it also means to be original and authoritative. And so authenticity is sort of this, I like to say, it's sort of partly being yourself and partly being badass. It's like if Joe Exotic and Kamala Harris had a baby together, right? It's like, and so how I define it myself is a couple ways. One, the definition I use is authenticity is about exposing who you are when people least expect it, in the service of others. So exposing who you are when people least expect it, in the service of others. And then I have a framework called the 6 Principles of Strategic Authenticity, with an acronym HUMANS, which walks through 6 things. And I always tell people, like, of course, it's not to tell you how to be 100% authentic. That would be hypocritical.
Right.
But the principles, the HUMANS framework, is really training wheels, or, to mix metaphors, sort of a life preserver, so that you can start swimming upstream of that current that brings you down the inauthentic. It's things that you can start to do to start to catch the bug, because what you said before was absolutely right. I wasn't doing it just out of rebellion. The reason I was doing it, and I didn't realize, I had been collecting data points for years and years and years. First of all, I didn't start being authentic as a CEO. It has been what was making me successful leading up to that, right?
Yeah.
And the reason I had been doing it was the quote unquote data points I had collected mostly from my father, watching his success being that way, but subconsciously going, oh, it's okay. Or, oh, when he does that, people like him. He sells more business. He's a better teacher. He's in a couple different businesses. So the framework, again, is meant to just sort of get you into out of that, going through the motions that business can do, doing things right, following, the formula, looking like a smart lawyer who has all their poop together, right? And so, experimenting with some of these things will start to give you those data points and get you addicted to it, actually, quite frankly, because those data points are going to, be like, holy cow, this client like really laughed and came back for more business, or this grew. And now, like, once you do that a few times, you don't need the humans framework, right? You're just going to be addicted to your own data points, and you're going to start doing things differently.
Yeah. And so, and I think this is really pertinent for our audience, because I think a lot of times lawyers may feel handcuffed by this cloud of all of these ethics rules and codes of conduct around them. And so they probably, I think a lot of them think that they have to act and conduct themselves a certain way. And to an extent they do, but I think that leash is probably a lot longer than they may realize. And they still have that flexibility to be authentic and to still, like you said, I think there's like this weird dichotomy where they think, people think lawyers have to act a certain way, and then lawyers then play into that. And coming out and being authentic, like you said, when people don't expect it, I think really opens up a lot of opportunity for them to be more effective and to do a lot better work for the people that they're serving.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think they get, it's easy to get stuck in, I have to be this way because it makes me look smart and credible, when we forget that the number one most important business, especially for lawyers, but including lawyers, is trust.
Mm-hmm.
It's trust and connection with their clients, with judges, with, whoever, there, and there is no faster pass to that connection and trust than authenticity. We have the data, it shows it. And so, and I think, I'd love to tell a quick story to that sort of brings this to life, specific to your audience. So I have a podcast as well. It's called Because Work Doesn't Have to Suck. And I co-host it with my good friend, Nicole. We've been doing it for 4.5 years. And she has a good friend. Her name is Nicole, not Nicole, Renee Bauer. And Renee has owned her own law firm. She's a family practice lawyer, owned her own firm for 12 plus years, and was doing really well, award-winning practice here in Connecticut, doing well. And Nicole had her on our podcast. She was one of our probably first 15 interviews or so. And Nicole interviewed her. And because she was a good friend, and Nicole's crazy, she showed up at Renee's house with a huge platter of sushi, a bottle, maybe 2 of wine, and was like, we're going to have fun with this. Right. And she started asking Renee questions. Now, Renee now has a podcast and is a speaker, but it was her first podcast. And so Nicole just, because we're all about authenticity, she really dug into her background. And Nicole, because she knew her so well, knew that Renee also herself had been divorced twice. And she's now happily married to, honestly, Jay's the best guy ever, but, had gone through obviously some ups and downs herself. And then ironically was a family practice lawyer. And so Nicole asked her some questions about that. And I don't know if it was the unexpectedness, or the wine or the sushi or all of it, Renee answered it.
Yeah.
And talked about her own experience, which she'd never done before. And Nicole, afterwards, she told her, that's the first time I've really talked openly about my own, situation going through divorce. Yeah. And Nicole's like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that. And, I think Renee, of course, her thought was, well, no, that if I talk about that, that's going to make me look like a not credible. Who wants to work with a divorce attorney who's on her third marriage, right? And so we released the episode, and what has happened since then is nothing short of amazing. I mean, her law firm has completely exploded. She so much so that shortly after, she started a brand called Happy Even After, and renamed her. So really sort of helping people understand it was more than just legal. She started telling her story. A lot of her clients are women, helping them with their happy even after, and created a whole brand and business and et cetera. And so it's just a good example of how, when we say authenticity, it's not unethical, and it's not even necessarily fancy. It's just exposing who you are when people least expect it, to serve others. And she was serving others by saying, hey, look, I get where you've been. I've been there too. And that makes me, probably a better trusted resource.
Yeah. And so to kind of, reiterate that, especially with our audience, and this is such a great example, because I think a lot of times lawyers might feel a little bit hesitant to be authentic out of fear of exposing who they really are, and that being some kind of negative thing. But especially in this case, it's one of those things where it ended up really becoming a positive for her, and helped people really connect with her in a positive way, even though maybe on paper it could be seen as a negative situation.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's science behind it. Have you ever heard of the Pratfall Effect?
I have not.
Yeah, I mean, so humility is one of the 6 primary components. It's the H in humans, but there's data. So back in 1960s, there was a psychologist that had this theory that people who did a pratfall, which is kind of an old world name for like did something wrong or a humility moment, right? It's it's something they used in acting, but it's like a blunder. So his theory was that people who were seen as competent, this is really important, he thought when they have a blunder or a pratfall, will actually be more likable or more selected. And so he conducted an experiment. He put people into 4 groups: competent without a pratfall, competent with a pratfall, and then less competent with and without a pratfall. And the experiment was around what the people listening thought these people were trying out for, like a game show. So it was very objective. Like they were getting some answers, the competent ones were clearly competent. They were getting more answers right. Others weren't. And they had these groups listen. And the ones that had the pratfall was just them at the end of the contest or whatever, their submission, saying, oh crap, I spilled some coffee on my jacket, right? Pretending like they accidentally spilled coffee. And what his experiment found was that, in fact, those that were competent, that had that blunder and spilled the coffee, were selected significantly more as the contestants, as more likable. The same was not true. It was not true when they were seen as less competent. That it actually brought it down. And I think that's a really important point. Authenticity, or exposing who you are, your humility moment. If you just do that, and then you do sloppy work, and you don't, follow up timely, and it will hurt you. But if you have a track record, if you are, doing good business, if you are, organized and doing, your practice well, which I would imagine most of your listeners are and strive to do that, adding in that humility moment, that authenticity, that pratfall, whatever you want to call it, actually will make their stakes go up. And the experiment, the data, the science, the Pratfall Effect, confirms that.
Yeah. And that makes total sense to me, because I'm thinking about, myself as a consumer. To me, if I'm getting a divorce, I look more favorably on a lawyer who has also gone through divorce, because they can at least empathize with me to a higher level than someone who's been like, yeah, I've been married for 25 years. Everything's great. I don't know why you can't do that. Like, because that's just at least how my mind would work.
100%. 100%. People want to connect. I mean, we want imperfection, like drug dealers want cocaine. Like we crave it. We crave seeing, whether it's our friends and going into their house and being like, oh, thank God it's messy. Right. Like, oh, makes me feel bad. Like we don't care about their house. Like when it's clean, we're not like, oh, they're so amazing. No, we think, God, I'm so crappy at keeping my house. Right. We all bring it back to ourselves. So when we see those imperfections, it's such a relief. And it's just like immediate, like, oh, you're just like me. You're not perfect.
Yeah. So what does this look like? I think, it's easy for us to imagine these sorts of things in actionable, tangible steps. So beyond just kind of like a mindset thing, like how
Mm.
can authenticity be something that's tangible and actionable? Like what can people do?
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit. The framework humans, the six principles, it stands for humility, being unexpected, modeling, adapting, narrating, and sparking. And so within those, there's a couple experiments and tangible things that I would give to you. I mean, the first and probably the most powerful that combines both the humility and the storytelling or narrate is in your introduction when you're meeting new clients or new judges or whoever,
Mhm.
is creating what I call an intriguing intro. Because
Mm.
most people would be like, "Hey, John, nice to meet you. Tell me a little about yourself." Well, I've spent 4 years doing marketing and podcasting, and then you give them sort of like the resume. And
Yeah.
especially if you're in a group setting, nobody heard a thing you said because you know what they're doing. They're thinking about what they're going to say, right?
Yeah.
Unless you're last, they're
Yeah.
like, "Oh, I have no idea what he just said," because I'm trying to figure out what my intro is going to be.
Yeah.
Instead, if you can create an intro that combines a humility moment with what I call a big brag. So that might look like, I do this exercise with groups all the time, where you write down all your humility moments. And maybe you say to me, we'll do a super simple one. Let's say you're a lawyer. You're like, I fail. You know what? One of my humility moments, I failed, constitutional law 101 when I was in college, like F. Okay. Now, do you have to expose that? No, there's nothing in ethics if you're running a practice that says you have to tell them your grades on every class. Do people expect you to expose it? Absolutely not. But let's say you say, look, first thing I have to tell you about myself is I was gung ho on becoming a lawyer. Got my undergraduate degree. I went to law school and I took my, first semester, and guess what I got in constitutional law? I got a big fat F. But I didn't give up. I finished school and I went on from there, and I, went to XYZ law firm. Within 2 years, I became the hottest ticket on town, or whatever your big brag is. I,
Yeah.
closed X number of cases and then decided to do this. And the reason I tell you all of this is because if you work with me, understand that you're not getting somebody who gets it right all the time,
Mhm.
but you're getting somebody that's always going to tell you, the truth and tell you what's going on, right? So, and that's a very obvious, but there's so many ways. So if you kind of play with, what is this humility moment I can expose, a time when you messed up, couple that with your competence, like in the Pratfall Effect, like a big brag, the biggest thing, the thing that gives you that credibility, because you owe that to them too.
Yeah.
And then end it with and here's why I tell you, I'm telling you, John, immediately they're done. They're like, if they're shopping law firms, you've got
Yeah.
the business in the first 3 minutes, because nobody else is going to do that. They're going to feel this connection. They're not even going to be able to name it. And I don't know why. I really can't figure it out. I really like this
Yeah.
John guy, right? They may not even know, but it fast passes you through the 0 moments of truth. Do you ever talk about Zemont and the 0 moments of truth at
I have
all?
not. No.
So the 0 moments of truth is something that came out of I don't know, a big thinker at Google or something like that, but it's pretty well known and recognized in the marketing community. And essentially, in the olden days, they always talked about first moments of truth. And that was like when you went to a grocery store, you saw a new type of cereal and decided, am I going to buy this or not? Right? Everything was very transactional. And like, how do we get them at that time to buy that box of cereal at that first moment of truth? Well, times have changed. And also, as you think about big B2B or bigger clients, like your listeners are doing, there's something called a 0 moments of truth. And that's the time leading up to making a decision. Do they know, like, and trust you? Which is, I'm sure, we use that all the time.
Mhm. Oh
And
yeah.
the 0 moments of truth say that in general, people need 7 hours of interaction across 11 interactions in 4 locations before they'll buy from you.
Mm.
That is the
Okay.
general truth. And that's why, you think I call it the olden days, but it's why guys, I hate to say it, mostly guys went golfing, right? There you got
Yeah.
another location, you got 4 hours probably knocked off, right? You've like cut into your Zemont immediately. Or you've flown to San Francisco for an hour and a half dinner. Like, was that really worth it? Well, yes, because it was reducing the ZMOT. You can still do those things, but in this modern day and age, a lot of people don't. They replace those with other things. And there's really three things you can do. One is relationships, which everybody knows. If you got a relationship, an introduction, it's always, age old. The second is really content creation. That's why people do content creation, like a podcast, like a LinkedIn article, like a book, right? Behind the scenes, people can get to know, would I want to work with Spotlight Branding? Well, I don't have to do the meetings. I'm just going to sleuth through their podcast and through their articles and see if I jive with their philosophy. Are these good people? Like, do they, right? Do they say the things that I believe in? And the third thing is authenticity. And authenticity is such a speed pass. I have been on a number of sales calls where, look, it was a big, arrangement, a large sum. I didn't really know the person, but by bringing in, the intriguing intro, by sort of talking to them using language that isn't all stuffy, being robotic, all the principles of authenticity, I was able to significantly reduce the ZMOT. And so the way I frame it to people is like, look, you don't have to be authentic. You can choose not to pick that. You absolutely can. But you have to do something to get ZMOT down to zero. And you have to do something else. So if you're not doing that, you have to do the steak dinners or write the books or do and it's just a matter of which one you want to do. And I think most people would say, I think the authenticity thing sounds a little easier than, some of the other strategies.
Yeah. And no, it's really, and as you're talking, I mean, we didn't use that exact terminology, but it's still the same sort of process that we tell our clients to do. I mean, you have to stay top of mind. You have to keep showing up and in different places. That's why it's good to be on social media. It's good to have the email newsletters going out. It's good to have that sort of introduction and have that framework be part of your bio page on your website if you're not being able to meet these people in person, and really start building up that rapport and building up that trust. And it makes it so much easier because again, it breaks down those barriers, builds that trust a lot faster.
That's right. And then the holy grail is if you can show up in those places in an authentic way, right? So your article, most lawyers talk with stuffy stuff. You talk with layman's terms and funny, you say poopy instead of whatever.
Yeah.
Like now it's like double whammy, speed through the ZMOT, get the sale, get the client.
Yeah. So, and to kind of start to wrap this up here, I've talked with a bunch of lawyers, and I brought this up in other episodes, but I've talked to so many lawyers who just have this mindset of, I'm not really that special. I don't have anything unique. I'm just writing wills for people. I'm just, filing divorces for people. Like, there's nothing super unique about me. What do you say to people, because granted, there may be some element, they may just feel authentic in that regard of this is just what I do. This was the path I chose, whatever. But how can you, if you keep that, or if there is something authentic that can be pulled out, how do you get that started? How do you even find that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it starts with a lot of questions, but I think the first thing I would frame up for them is people don't buy products and services, that they trust. They buy from people they trust. Right. And so the first place most companies look for their uniqueness is in their products and services. Right. And that's why we spend so much time, spending money on technology and fancy billboards or whatever it is. And instead could be spending a lot less time on what I call bargain innovation. And bargain innovation is essentially finding the innovative things in you, or it's not even innovative, right? So I think when you're looking for what's unique, I mean, it could be that, in your spare time, you are a head referee for soccer, New York. And when you do that, this is what you learn from it and bring into your practice. It could be that you came from a background of poverty, and now that you're, you do your legal activity, it sort of informs how, the practice and what you're doing. I think I would be very, very shocked if anybody listening right now couldn't find something that's unique. And so I think the first place you need to look at is you. It's like the example back to Renee. It wasn't about maybe her practice and how they did things, but it was about her and not just about her, but the fact that she was willing to expose it.
Yeah.
So look at you first, find what's unique about you. And if you can't do that, get a coach or somebody, a business coach. I mean, this is what I do. I work with companies to help them grow it. And, somebody that can look at it from the outside in will ask the right questions and probably see things pretty darn quickly that you can leverage. Then you just have to have the guts to do it a little bit differently and to go out there and expose it and stand, strong against it, even if everybody else isn't, because that's where the power is.
Yeah, no, and it's such a great transition. You're a professional at this. Like I was going to say, like, that's why it's important to work with someone like you, because I think a lot of times business owners, lawyers, it's almost like they approach their audience as if they're just trying to sell to themselves. And you're not buying your service from yourself. And so it's easy to kind of get bored and jaded with your own story because you've lived it every single day. You're used to it. But the people who you're building that trust with, the people who are going to buy from you and work with you, it's all brand new to them, and it can be very exciting with them. And so that's where that encouragement and working with someone like you can pull that out and kind of reframe that perspective to really amplify that value in what makes someone unique and authentic.
Yeah. And if you don't mind, I'm going to be a little bit contrarian even to that. I think it's honestly, John, it's the opposite. When you say people try to sell what they think they'd want to buy, they're not honest with themselves on how they buy. I feel like, I do this all the time when I work with groups and, for example, one executive group I worked with, they had an upcoming town hall and the woman was confessing they already had it. And she said, I was thinking about when I was going to do my piece, I was going to tell a story and I was going to do kind of more authentic. But then I thought, that's not what everybody else wants. And I looked around the group. I said, raise your hand if you'd prefer somebody go in with the rigid, give the update on the numbers, the expected, none of the hands went up.
Right.
And then how many people would rather have heard the messy story, the inspirational, and all the hands go up. And I actually think we have a disease. This is the metaphor I use.
Yeah.
When you have a kid's birthday party, they're 3 or 4 years old, they go to like the bouncy house, then they come into the room and they do the pizza and the cake, right? And they get the pizza and then they come around with the cake and they give cake to the kids and they're all like, oh, can I get a bigger piece? Or can I get more ice cream? Or they all take the cake. And then the parents are awkwardly standing around the outside and then they have some extra and they come around. And of course they ask, John, would you like a piece of cake? Well, what do most parents say?
I haven't gotten that far yet. My son's only like 2.5 months old. I mean, I know I would probably my initial reaction would be to no, I'm good and let people move on. But maybe other people.
Thank you for being honest. No, that's most people say no. But what are most people thinking?
Yeah, it'd be good to have.
I really would love it. I would that's authenticity at work. And I think when we say, oh, we're marketing like we want to be marketed, I think if you really slow down and you take off your hat as the business owner and put on your hat as a consumer, like you've done throughout this interview, right? You're like, oh, well, that's how and you really think about what you are most attracted to and you market it that way.
Yes.
Actually, I think you'd be more successful. I think we're just not honest to ourselves. Instead, we try to build what we should or looks cool or we think other people want, and that we have this disease. We're the only one that secretly wants the cake. And it's like, no, guess what? They all want the cake. Give them the freaking cake.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And that was what I was trying to articulate. I think a lot of lawyers, they get in this space of their market. A lot of times they market to other lawyers, and their content is geared toward other lawyers, and other lawyers aren't the ones who are hiring you for your service. It is the audience. And so what piques your audience's interest may be very different from what piques another lawyer's interest. And being able to break down that barrier is what's really going to help, help your firm and help grow, so much more. So tons of great info here. How can people learn more about you and follow you and see everything that you've got going on?
Yeah, I mean, the best place to sort of find me is LinkedIn. I have a website, but I'm most active on LinkedIn. So connect with me there. And then, yeah, if you're listening to a podcast, you can also listen to Because Work Doesn't Have to Suck, where we sort of help you do things more authentically. And then, see if anything floats your boat. And then there's lots of other ways that you can get involved in the authenticity movement.
Awesome. Love it. One final question for you before we wrap up. If you had one last piece of advice for our audience, what would it be?
I'm writing my next book, and I think it would be the 50% rule, because I'm totally obsessed with it. So the next book is called The 50% Rule. My first book was called You Do You-ish, which was really about authenticity and what we're talking about. How do you use it as a superpower? The 50% rule is this stupid, simple rule, John, that basically says every time you're given advice, including this podcast, including listening to you and me, or you're looking at how things were done before, you're trying something new, only take about half of what was done before, what people tell you. Leave the half that doesn't feel like you, that you think you could do better, and curate that with something new and different. And it sounds stupid, but I'm telling you, people, if you could just, every time you get stuck in the next week, say to yourself, how could I 50% rule this?
Yeah.
It's magical. And it's got so many twists and turns that you got a full book already written on it, working with a publisher. And I'm just totally addicted to it. So that would be my advice. 50% rule, your barriers for the next week, and see how that works out.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I definitely want to learn more about that, because God, I mean, how many times do we get frustrated when people ask us for advice and then they don't listen to any of it because it's what they want to hear, or someone gives us advice and it's not what we want to hear. So that is a really, really interesting concept that people can really take with them. So thank you so much for taking some time to join us this week. And that's going to do it for us here on Center Stage. Thank you so much for continuing to listen. Again, rate and review the show. Let us know what you'd like to hear from us in the future. And that's going to do it. Erin, thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks, John.
Thanks for listening. To learn more, go to spotlightbranding.com/center stage.